available at the moment. Can I take your number down and I'll pass the message along?
Karl Marx believed that you would have a rebellion by the workers against the capitalist system, which would then create a Marxist communist society in the wealthiest and most industrialized countries. It never happened.
When the workers of the world did not unite behind Lenin's economic political Marxism, certain political scientists got together in Frankfurt, Germany, and formed a research center they called the Institute for Social Research. Later known as the Frankfurt School, this group of Marxist philosophers tried to figure out why the workers of the world did not unite behind economic political Marxism. As Max Horkheimer, one of the school's founders, put it,
Marx got it all wrong. The workers are not up to being the vanguard of the communist revolution. Let's translate Marxism into cultural terms.
By cultural terms, Horkheimer meant cultural institutions like the movies. Workers of the world were more united by the movies they watched than the economic and political institutions they supported.
Every single major mainstream institution has been influenced heavily by cultural Marxism, which is at the core of this movement. This has been an assault on the very character and nature of our country. America was born not as a Marxist nation, but as a nation of liberty and a nation of law, a nation that respected the laws of God, the natural laws of God, the revealed laws of God. Cultural Marxism is polar opposite of those values, and since they have taken over, for the most part, the major mainstream institutions of America, now we are literally inundated with cultural Marxism to the point that we have a generation today that probably wouldn't even recognize it as cultural Marxism. They would recognize it as norm.
Given this turn of events, the Frankfurt School reasoned that the movie industry and all other cultural institutions had to be infiltrated and destroyed. George Lukács.
I see the revolutionary destruction of society as the one and only solution. A worldwide overturning of values cannot take place without the annihilation of the old values and the creation of the new ones by the revolutionaries.
So to get to that point, they said we have to destroy the culture, and what they were talking about was the Christian culture, what we used to call Christendom or Western civilization.
As fate would have it, many of the Frankfurt School's leading lights had to leave for America when World War II broke out. Now safe in New York at places like Columbia University, the school's social engineers began applying their techniques to each new crop of studio executives emerging from the nation's Ivy League colleges. Antonio Gramsci, one of the notable leaders of the Frankfurt School, put it this way.
The civilized world has been thoroughly saturated with Christianity for 2,000 years. Any country grounded in Judeo-Christian values cannot, therefore, be overthrown until those roots are cut.
Gramsci actually argued with a lot of his fellow communists who wanted to take control physically. He said, no, the way to do it is to march through the institutions, march through the churches and through the schools and through the media, through the culture. And he actually was in prison, and he wrote a book that outlined his thinking, and his thinking has been adopted by a lot of people.
And sure enough, the Long March eventually saturated the youthful minds of even the Hollywood control group. Screenplays and movies of every possible anti-Christian, anti-family, and anti-capitalist theme now poured forth from Hollywood. And the Long March didn't infect just the Hollywood movie studios. It hit the new radio and TV industries, the theater, the music industry, book and magazine publishing industries, the public school system, and even the clergy.
In the first part of the 20th century, through the middle part of the 20th century, there were a lot of pastors and clergymen and ministers that saw this coming, and they did speak out against it. Unfortunately, as you got into the second half of the 20th century, the clergy, the ministers, the pastors became much more oriented toward success, big buildings, big crowds, big offerings. It became a success-driven ministry as opposed to a truth-driven ministry. And so for the second half of the 20th century and now into the 21st century, the resistance of the clergy and of the church in general is almost non-existent.
Yes, during this long march, traditional values would be replaced with Marxist values, a worldwide overturning of values as Lukács had promised. Eventually, only what's politically correct was to remain. Political correctness is thus the attempt to use speech to control thought and behavior. It's an extension of the Marxist doctrine of equality, but applied to speech. Make speech equally acceptable, tolerable to all people, and thought and behavior can be universally controlled as well.
What that really means is that you're only allowed to express or even hold viewpoints that are accepted in a very narrow box. These are accepted and approved viewpoints, and if you have viewpoints outside of that, you'll be demonized and attacked and marginalized. What's happened to us?
It's sad. Berkeley was the epicenter of the free speech movement in the 60s, holding a sign outside of the archway. Now it is becoming the epicenter of the no free speech movement.
And, you know, just advocating, speaking like the founding fathers, advocating limited government, advocating that the government be bound by the Constitution, and advocating that, you know, police officers and members of the military have an obligation and duty to refuse unlawful orders, for example. Even that alone is considered to be outside the bound.
If you're told that something is incorrect and therefore you must not speak about it, the implication is that the reason you shouldn't speak about it or use certain words is because it's bad. Well, if it's bad, then if you have those thoughts and you think that it was okay, then there's something wrong with you. You see what I'm trying to say? The implication is, especially if you're just a child in school, and you're picking up this concept of political correctness as a child, you're being taught not only what is acceptable, but you're being taught of what is right and wrong. And therefore, you are absorbing the values, the cultural values, the mores of those who are setting the standards.
And nowhere is politically correct thought and behavior more controlled than academia and its spawn, the new corporate Hollywood. Yes, totalitarian in nature, political correctness is not only an enemy of free speech, it's literally a synonym for cultural Marxism itself. And Hollywood was infected big time.